My brother Kevin slapped my 6-year-old daughter across the face so hard it left a bright red handprint on her cheek. He did it in front of my entire family in the middle of a sunny afternoon because her laughter was too loud. But that single violent act was not the thing that shattered my world. The thing that destroyed everything, the sound that echoed in the sudden ringing silence, was the sound of my own parents laughing. They thought it was a joke. They had no idea that their laughter was the sound of a gavel falling, a final judgment that would bring the full and unforgiving weight of the law down upon their perfect, protected son. It was my mother's annual 4th of July barbecue, a tradition as sacred and as predictable as the holiday itself. The backyard was a familiar tableau of suburban bliss. The air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass, sizzling hot dogs, and the sweet, smoky scent of my father's secret recipe barbecue sauce. A collection of aunts, uncles, and cousins were scattered across the lawn in folding chairs, their conversations a low, pleasant hum beneath the pop music playlists my mother curated every year. It was, on the surface, a picture of idyllic family harmony. But I had always known that just beneath that perfectly manicured lawn lay a bedrock of dysfunction, and the fault line ran directly through my brother, Kevin. Kevin was my parents' golden child. He had always been louder, more demanding, more charismatic than me, and my parents had always mistaken his arrogance for confidence. They had spent a lifetime making excuses for him, smoothing over his mistakes and protecting him from the consequences of his own short temper. He was a spoiled man-child who had never been told no, and as a result, he believed the world should bend to his comfort. My daughter, Maya, was the opposite of her uncle. She was a whirlwind of pure, unadulterated joy, a 6-year-old supernova of giggles, cartwheels, and boundless energy. She was playing with her 2 slightly older cousins near the patio, their shrieks of delight as they chased each other through the sprinkler, a happy, chaotic soundtrack to the afternoon. I watched them from my chair, a contented smile on my face. My husband, Tom, sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee. We were in our own little bubble of peace, happy to just watch our daughter experience the simple, perfect joy of a summer afternoon. But I could feel the pressure changing. I saw Kevin sitting with my father by the grill, his face growing darker with every happy shriek from the children. He kept shooting annoyed glances in their direction, his jaw tight. "Can someone get them to keep it down?" he grumbled loudly to my mother. "I can't even hear myself think." My mother, Linda, just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, they're just being children, dear. Have another beer." But he couldn't let it go. His irritation was a palpable thing, a dark cloud encroaching on the sunny day. The final moment came with a sudden, beautiful burst of pure childhood exuberance. Maya, having successfully evaded her cousins in a game of tag, ran a victory lap around the patio. She threw her head back, her pigtails flying, and let out a squeal of pure, triumphant glee. It was a sound of pure happiness. She happened to run right past Kevin's chair at that exact moment. It happened so fast I almost didn't process it. In one fluid, furious motion, Kevin turned, his arm lashing out. A sharp, ugly sound of the slap cut through the air, silencing the music, the conversations, the entire party. Maya stumbled back, her small hand flying to her cheek. Her face was a mask of pure, shocked disbelief. Her joyful, laughing eyes were now wide with terror and confusion. Then her face crumpled, and a wail of pain and betrayal erupted from her, a sound so full of anguish it physically hurt me to hear. Tom and I were on our feet in an instant, rushing to her side. I scooped her up, her small body trembling uncontrollably in my arms. I could already see the bright red imprint of a full-grown man's hand blooming on her soft, perfect cheek. I turned, my own face a mask of cold, murderous rage, ready to unleash a lifetime of fury upon my brother.
I looked at him, expecting to see some flicker of remorse, of shock at his own actions. But there was none. He stood there, unrepentant, his arms crossed over his chest. "What?" he said defensively, a sneer on his face. She was screaming directly in my ear. Someone has to teach her some manners. But even his breathtaking arrogance was not the worst part. The worst part came from my parents. I looked at them, my mother and father, expecting them to be horrified, to rush to their granddaughter's side, to reprimand their son for his monstrous act. Instead, they laughed. It wasn't a loud, raucous laugh. It was a small, quiet, dismissive chuckle. The kind of laugh you give when a child has a silly tantrum. "Oh, Kevin," my mother said, shaking her head with a fond, exasperated smile. "Don't be so dramatic. She's fine. A little tap never hurt anyone. She needed to learn to use her inside voice." My father just nodded in agreement, taking a sip of his beer. The world went silent. The sounds of the party, the music, my daughter's heartbroken sobs, it all faded away. The only thing I could hear was the echo of that laugh, that small, terrible sound. It was the sound of their choice. They had seen their son strike their 6-year-old granddaughter, and they had chosen him. They had looked at her pain, at the red mark on her face, and they had decided it was funny. They had decided it was acceptable. And that single, unforgivable moment, they ceased to be my parents. They ceased to be her grandparents. They were just strangers who happened to share my blood. And I knew, with the certainty so absolute it was chilling, that I would never, ever let them near my child again. Time seemed to warp and stretch in the aftermath of the slap. The world, which had been a chaotic whirl of summer sounds, narrowed to a single, horrifyingly clear picture. My daughter's crumpled face, the ugly red handprint blooming on her cheek, and beyond her, the smiling, laughing faces of my own parents. Their chuckles were quiet, but they landed on my soul like thunderclaps, demolishing a very foundation of what I had always believed family to be. I held Maya close, her small body racked with sobs, and as I rocked her gently, my mind, in an act of self-preservation, retreated from the present and plunged into the past. A lifetime of similar, smaller betrayals began to flash before my eyes, each one a single brick in the wall that was now crumbling around me. I was suddenly 8 years old again, standing in my childhood living room. My favorite doll, a porcelain heirloom from my grandmother, lay shattered on the floor, its perfect painted face split in two. My brother, Kevin, a smug 10-year-old, stood nearby with the baseball bat he'd been explicitly told not to swing in the house. When my mother came in, her eyes took in the scene, and her first words were not to him, but to me. "Sarah, you know how your brother is," she had said with a heavy sigh of disappointment. "Why would you leave your doll on the floor where he could trip? You need to be more careful with your things." It was my fault. His recklessness was my responsibility. That was the first lesson. The memory dissolved, replaced by another. I was 16, standing proudly next to my award-winning painting at the regional high school art fair. I had called my parents, my voice buzzing with excitement, to tell them I had won first prize. "That's wonderful, honey," my father had said over the phone, "but we can't make it to the awards ceremony tonight. Kevin's team made it to the district playoffs. It's a very important game. You understand." I understood. His game, his victory was a tangible public event. My quiet personal achievement was a secondary concern, something that could be celebrated later, or not at all. His needs were important. Mine were optional. That was the second lesson. The scenes kept coming, a relentless cascade of memory. I saw myself at 24, introducing them to Tom for the first time. I saw the way my mother had looked down her nose at him when he said he was a public school teacher. I heard Kevin's condescending joke about Tom's modest salary. And I saw my parents' quiet complicity, their failure to defend the good, kind man their daughter loved. I remembered swallowing my anger, forcing a smile, and making excuses for them later, all for the sake of a smooth, peaceful introduction. I had sacrificed my own dignity on the altar of their approval. The most painful memory of all was from Maya's first birthday. My parents had promised to be there. They were going to be the first to arrive. An hour before the party, they had called to cancel. Kevin, now 28, needed them to help him move a new sofa into his apartment. It couldn't possibly wait. He just gets so stressed about these things, my mother had explained, as if her grown son's furniture anxiety was a medical emergency. We'll see Maya next week, I promise. I had looked at the tiny, perfect cake, the single candle, the pile of presents, and I had cried. But then I forgave them. I told myself that it was important for Maya to have grandparents, even flawed, unreliable ones. I told myself that keeping the peace was the most important thing. All these years, I had called this sacrifice, keeping the peace. I had thought I was being the bigger person, the mature one, the peacemaker who absorbed the small hurts and slights to maintain the fragile ecosystem of our family. I see now I was wrong. It wasn't peace I was keeping. It was a toxic, one-sided truce. I was the only one making sacrifices. They simply took and took, their casual cruelty enabled by my silence, their favoritism for Kevin allowed to grow unchecked like a malignant tumor. My forgiveness hadn't been an act of grace. It had been an act of permission. I had taught them, through my own quiet endurance, that their behavior had no consequences. I looked up from my daughter's tear-stained hair, back at my laughing parents. The fog of a lifetime of obligation finally lifted, and I saw them with a terrifying, absolute clarity. They were not just flawed, they were dangerous. My sacrifice of my own feelings was a price I had been willing to pay, but the price was now my daughter's safety, her emotional well-being, her understanding of what love and family are supposed to look like. And that was a price I could not pay. A new feeling, cold and pure and ferocious, surged through me, drowning out the grief and the hurt. It was the primal, unthinking, and all-powerful instinct of a mother protecting her young. This was my secret weapon. Not a hidden fortune, not a secret identity, but a love so fierce it could burn entire worlds to the ground. The line had been crossed. The truce was broken. I looked at my unrepentant brother and my laughing parents, and I no longer saw family. I saw a threat. And I made a silent, solemn vow to the crying child in my arms. Never again. The sacrifice was over. The consequences were about to begin. I held my daughter, my beautiful, vibrant, loving daughter, and I felt the tectonic plates of my world shift beneath my feet. The person I had been just 5 minutes earlier, the woman who prioritized peace at any cost, the daughter who would swallow any slight for the sake of a quiet holiday, was gone. She had been burned away in the crucible of my parents' laughter. In her place stood someone new, someone colder, harder, and infinitely stronger. A mother. I gently shushed Maya's heartbroken sobs, wiping the tears from her cheek with my thumb, carefully avoiding the angry red mark that was still blooming there. "It's okay, my love," I whispered, my voice a low, steady murmur that I didn't recognize as my own. "Mommy's here. We're leaving now. This is over." I stood up, my movements no longer hesitant or apologetic, but imbued with a new, chilling sense of purpose. Tom, my husband, rose with me, his face a mask of silent, supportive fury. He had been waiting for my signal, and he saw it now. My family, my former family, was still frozen in their tableau of careless cruelty. The laughter had died on their lips,
replaced by a confused, defensive uncertainty. They expected me to scream, to cry, to make a scene. My cold, quiet composure was something they were utterly unprepared for. "Sarah, don't be so dramatic," my mother began, her voice laced with the familiar tone of dismissive annoyance. "It was nothing. Kevin didn't mean it." I didn't even look at her. My gaze was fixed on my brother. I looked into his eyes and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not anger, not even a flicker of the familial love I had once forced myself to feel. There was simply a void. He was a stranger to me, a dangerous one. "Yes, Sarah, relax," Kevin sneered, trying to recapture his earlier bravado. "Can't handle a little bit of discipline, can you?" I ignored him completely. My silence was my answer. It was a language they couldn't comprehend. I turned to Tom and gave a single, sharp nod. He understood instantly. He walked over to the patio table and began gathering our things with slow, deliberate movements. My purse, Maya's half-eaten slice of watermelon, the small bag with her sunscreen and toys. Each collected item was a punctuation mark at the end of a chapter. We were not fleeing. We were not having a tantrum. We were strategically and permanently withdrawing from the field of battle. We started our walk of departure. It was a long, silent walk across the manicured lawn, past the stunned faces of my aunts and uncles, who now averted their gazes, suddenly fascinated by their paper plates. We walked through the sliding glass door, through the house that was no longer a home, and out the front door into the bright, indifferent sunshine. The click of the front door closing behind us was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door swinging shut, with all the monsters safely locked inside. In the car, the silence was thick and heavy, broken only by Maya's soft, hiccuping sobs from her car seat in the back. I buckled her in, my hands gentle, my face a mask of stone. I climbed into the driver's seat and just sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. "What do we do now, Sarah?" Tom finally asked, his voice raw. "I'll support anything, anything you want. If you want me to go back in there and break his jaw, just say the word." I looked at my husband, at his kind, furious face, and a wave of love for him washed over me. "No," I said, my voice low and controlled. "Arguing with them is useless. It's what they expect. They think we'll drive around the block, cool off, and come back for dessert to pretend this never happened. They think we'll be there for Thanksgiving. That's the cycle. But the cycle," I said, turning the key in the ignition, "just broke." I pulled the car away from the curb and drove for a few blocks before pulling over into the shade of a large oak tree. I turned off the engine. "This wasn't a disagreement, Tom," I said, my voice trembling now, not with weakness, but with a tightly controlled rage. "This wasn't a spanking. This was an adult man, angry about a noise, striking a child across the face in a fit of temper. That is an assault. And her grandparents, my parents, saw it happen and they laughed. They laughed at her daughter's pain and fear." I pulled out my phone. My hands were no longer shaking. They were perfectly steady. I opened the camera and angled it towards the back seat. "Maya, sweetie, can you look at Mommy for just a second?" She turned her tear-streaked face towards me, and I took 5 clear, high-resolution photographs of the bright red handprint that marred her beautiful cheek. Evidence. Then I closed the camera app. I took one last deep breath, a final farewell to the life I had known before, and I dialed 911. A calm, professional voice answered. "911, what is your emergency?" I looked at my husband, at his shocked and then slowly, dawningly proud expression. I looked in the rearview mirror at my precious daughter, and I spoke,
my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "I need to report an assault," I said. "The victim is a 6-year-old child." After I hung up with the 911 operator, a profound, almost unnerving calm settled over me. The world came back into sharp focus. I looked at my husband, Tom, whose face was a kaleidoscope of shock, awe, and fierce, unwavering support. He didn't question my decision. He simply reached out and took my hand, his grip a silent promise that we were in this together. My duty wasn't done yet. My daughter, my sweet Maya, was still trembling in her car seat, her earlier heartbroken wails having subsided into ragged, hiccuping sobs. My rage, as cold and sharp as it was, had to be put aside. She needed her mother. We didn't go home. Our house felt too quiet, too empty. Instead, I drove to a small, quiet park a few towns over, a place with a duck pond and old, sprawling oak trees. We sat on a bench, Maya cradled between us, and we brought her a pink ice cream cone with rainbow sprinkles. I watched as the simple act of eating something sweet, slowly, miraculously, began to mend the edges of her terror. She started to talk, not about the slap, but about the ducks, about the color of the sky, about whether sprinkles were magic. We let her lead us back into a world of childlike innocence, a world I had just vowed to protect with the ferocity of a wolf. It was during that quiet, healing hour that my phone rang. It was an officer from the local precinct following up on the 911 call. His voice was calm and professional. I recounted the events again, my own voice a perfect match for his, devoid of hysteria, a simple, factual account of a crime. I emailed him the time-stamped photos of Maya's teak. He assured me that 2 officers were being dispatched to the address I had provided. The wheels of justice, I realized, were now turning, completely independent of my own emotional turmoil. I can only imagine the scene back at the house, though a lifetime of experience gives my imagination a grim clarity. I imagine the initial shock of our departure giving way to my parents' and brother's familiar, practiced script of indignation. The other relatives, my aunts and uncles, would be shifting uncomfortably in their lawn chairs, wanting to leave but not wanting to cause a scene. My mother, Linda, would be fluttering about, trying to salvage her perfect party, refilling drinks and offering more potato salad, all while complaining about how terribly sensitive and dramatic I've always been. My father, Richard, would be nodding in agreement, nursing a beer by the grill and talking about how kids today don't understand discipline. And Kevin, my brother, he would be the center of it all, playing the dual roles of victim and hero. He'd be accepting sympathetic pats on the back, spinning a tale of how he was just trying to instill some manners in his out-of-control niece. He would be smug, secure in the lifelong knowledge that Mommy and Daddy would clean up any mess he made.
I imagine the music being turned back on, a forced and hollow attempt to recapture the festive mood. It is into this carefully reconstructed scene of suburban denial that I imagine the police car arriving, not with sirens blaring, but with a quiet, menacing presence, pulling up to the curb. The first sign of trouble would be the sudden silencing of the music. Then the conversations would die down as every head turned to watch 2 uniformed police officers walk, not to the front door, but with calm, authoritative purpose, through the open side gate and into the backyard. The party was over. The investigation had begun. I can see the officers, their faces professional and unreadable, approaching my father. "Are you the owner of this residence, sir?" I can see my mother rushing forward, her hostess smile plastered on her face. "Officers, is there a problem?" "We're here in response to a complaint, ma'am," one of the officers would say, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on my brother. "We need to speak with a Mr. Kevin Miller." The collective confusion would be a palpable thing. Kevin, arrogant as ever, would swagger forward. "That's me. Look, if this is about my sister leaving in a huff, it was just a silly family spat. She overreacted. And then the beautiful, terrible moment of reckoning. The moment the officer would look at his notepad and then back at my brother, his voice clear and loud enough for every guest to hear. "Sir, we're not here about a family spat. We are here in response to a formal criminal complaint filed by Sarah and Tom Miller, alleging that approximately 1 hour ago at this location, you intentionally struck their 6-year-old daughter, Maya Miller, across the face." The air would be sucked out of the backyard. I can picture Kevin's smirk faltering. I can see my mother's hand flying to her mouth. The officer would continue, his voice a relentless cascade of facts. "But complainant has provided us with photographic evidence of a visible injury to the child's face consistent with the allegation. Sir, under state law, striking a child in this manner constitutes physical assault. We need to take your formal statement regarding this incident." The words, criminal complaint, photographic evidence, injury, assault, they would land like explosions, demolishing their comfortable narrative of a little tap in family discipline. This was no longer a private matter to be smoothed over. I had invited the outside world in, a world with laws and consequences, a world that did not care about my mother's party or my father's opinion. I can see the pure panic terror bloom in my brother's eyes as the full weight of what I had done finally crashed down upon him. His life of consequence-free arrogance was over. His parents couldn't laugh this away. I can see the officers leading him to the side, beginning their questioning. I can see the other guests, my family, now not just relatives, but witnesses to a crime. The final image my mind conjures is the most satisfying of all. It is the image of my parents, standing on their perfect, manicured lawn, surrounded by the wreckage of their perfect party, their faces ashen with horror, as they finally, for the very first time, watch their golden child have to answer for his own actions. The family they had chosen to protect had just been exposed, and the daughter they had chosen to dismiss had just become the architect of their ruin. We drove home in a state of suspended reality, the world outside our car windows seeming muted and distant. The only thing that felt real was the small 3-person universe inside the car. My daughter, finally drifting off to sleep in the back seat, exhausted by her tears. My husband, his hand resting on my thigh, a silent, constant source of strength. And me, a woman who had just set fire to her entire past. There was no triumph yet, no satisfaction. There was only the hollow, echoing certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. We had been home for less than an hour when the first call came. It was my mother. I looked at the caller ID, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I answered and put the phone on speaker. "Sarah, what have you done?" Her voice was not one of concern, but of pure, hysterical panic. "The police were here. They took your brother downtown. They arrested him. You have to call them back. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You're ruining his life over a childish tantrum." I listened to her frantic, self-serving tirade without interruption. She spoke of Kevin's career, of the family's reputation, of the shame and embarrassment. She did not, even once, mention Maya's name. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. My voice was as calm and flat as a frozen lake. "Mom," I said, "what I have done is file a police report for the assault of my child." "It was not an assault," she shrieked. "It was a tap, a correction." "A correction?" I repeated, the words tasting like poison. "You stood there, 5 feet away. You saw the red mark on her face. You heard her terrified screams, and you laughed." I let the word hang in the air between us. You laughed. This is no longer a family matter to be discussed or negotiated. It is a legal matter. The consequences are his, and his alone to deal with. Do not call me again.
I ended the call before she could respond, my finger pressing the screen with a finality that was absolute. Then, one by one, I blocked her number, my father's number, and my brother's number. The first bricks in a new wall, a wall of safety, were being laid. The weeks that followed were a trial by fire. My parents, unable to reach me directly, launched a campaign, deploying aunts, uncles, and cousins as their messengers. The calls all started the same way. "Sarah, honey, I think you're overreacting. You know how Kevin's temper is. Don't tear the family apart over this." With each call, my response was the same, delivered with a quiet, unyielding firmness. "Did my mother tell you that she laughed when my daughter was struck? Yes or no?" The question was a conversation ender. Some would stammer an excuse, others would fall silent. I told each of them that my daughter's physical safety and emotional well-being were not negotiable. And if their definition of family included tolerating violence against a child, then they were no longer family to me. The lines were drawn. Many relatives I had known my entire life faded away, choosing loyalty to the old toxic system over the simple truth. It was painful, but it was also a necessary cleansing fire. Kevin, faced with a criminal charge and the undeniable photographic evidence, was offered a plea deal. He accepted. There was no jail time, but the consequences were real. A year of probation, mandatory enrollment in a high-intensity anger management program, a significant fine, and a permanent restraining order that legally barred him from coming within 500 feet of me or Maya. He now had a criminal record for assault, an indelible stain on the perfect life my parents had always tried to curate for him. A few months later, they made one last desperate attempt. They showed up at my house unannounced. I saw them through the window, the three of them standing on my porch looking lost and diminished. I told Tom to stay inside with Maya, and I went to face them alone, speaking to them through the locked screen door. It was the first time I had seen them since the barbecue. They looked older, worn down. "Sarah," my father began, his voice strained. We want to talk. This has gone on long enough." "We're sorry," my mother added, the words sounding foreign and clumsy in her mouth. "We didn't think. We just want our family back." I looked at them, at these three people who had caused so much pain, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty sadness. "The family you want back doesn't exist anymore," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You destroyed it. That day, on your lawn." I looked at my brother. "The slap was your crime, Kevin, but the laughter?" I shifted my gaze to my parents. "The laughter was yours." He hurt her body in a moment of anger. "You, with your laughter, you told her that her pain didn't matter. You told her that his violence was acceptable. You hurt her spirit. That is the thing I can never and will not ever forgive." "We miss her," my mother whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "We miss our granddaughter." "No," I said, the final, terrible truth settling between us. "The family you want back doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed it. That day, on your lawn." I looked at my brother. "The slap was your crime, Kevin. But the laughter?" I shifted my gaze to my parents. "The laughter was yours." He hurt her body in a moment of anger. You, with your laughter, you told her that her pain didn't matter. You told her that his violence was acceptable. You hurt her spirit. That is the thing I can never and will not ever forgive." "We miss her," my mother whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "We miss our granddaughter." "No," I said, the final terrible truth settling between us. "The family you want back doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed it. That day, on your lawn." "The restraining order stands." Our contact ends today. This isn't a punishment, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. This is a protection. My protection of my daughter from you. I closed the main door before they could reply, shutting out their world for the last time. It's been a year now. Our life is quieter. Holidays are smaller. But our home is a sanctuary of peace and safety. Maya is thriving. She is a happy, loud, brilliant, and confident 7-year-old who knows without a shadow of a doubt that she is loved and protected. Sometimes I feel a pang of sadness for the family I lost, but then I look at my daughter, truly see her, and I know I didn't lose a family. I saved one, the one that truly matters. I broke the generational cycle of toxicity and enablement. My ultimate vindication wasn't in my brother's punishment, it was in my daughter's laughter, now free to ring out as loud and as joyfully as she wants, in a home where it will always be the most beautiful sound in the world. An incredibly powerful story about a mother's fierce protection and drawing a line that can never be undrawn. This story brings up a very difficult question, and we want to know what you think. Do you believe Sarah did the right thing by calling the police on her own family? Let us know your honest opinion in the comments below. If the story resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and karma. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.